Coming in now.
Good morning. Welcome to Redgum Live.
Good morning, Rachel.
It's a bit hard to believe we are already in October.
I know, it's amazing.
It's a bit bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the weather's warming up.
We've had a couple of beach days over the weekend. It's been really lovely.
So if you're joining us for the first time, fantastic. Every week we have new people. We have people from all around Australia. We've got Josh and Darcy in the UK.
Yep.
And Dave Sharman, his mob over there in America. It's just amazing to have you all part of this morning. And even I've got a cousin, Roy Barnes and Rochelle, and they've been gathering a mob. Like the other night, they had their house packed out on a Sunday night watching Redgum.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice. No pressure.
No, so
That's great.
it's just great to have you all part of it. And you're all doing it in different ways. And there's some new ways that they can do it too in there.
Absolutely. There's been some slight government restrictions that have been lifted recently. We are now allowed to gather in groups of 10 outdoors. So we are going to be calling this Redgum Outdoors. So if you'd like to gather a group of people, you can go to, it's going to be a public place.
Yep.
So a park or a beach. So the main goal is community. So you can either watch the service and then gather, or take an iPad and watch it together, or what.
Well, you can actually,
creative.
if you put 10 people under your veranda, you're outdoors, aren't you?
I think it needs
And
to be
a
a public
TV.
place, though.
No, but for a faith gathering, you can do it.
Oh, we might need to check that.
The rules.
All right, Lauren's not here, so she normally knows everything about that. Maybe you can comment, Lauren. The other thing is you can have a bubble family over. So your bubble family is the one designated family where you can catch up. So married.
I'm getting confused already, but I agree with you.
So many rules.
Yeah.
So your bubble family is the family where you don't need to wear masks together and you can do things together.
Yep.
But the 10 people outdoors, you do need to wear a mask and stay socially distant. So that is one thing we can start doing, as well as Simon's Cafe. Do you know more info about that?
Yeah, every week, if you want to be, there's 10 people out at the cafe. So the first 10 to contact Coral or I or Simon, let us know you're coming. Fantastic. And so welcome to everyone. In fact, Simon, it's been a tough week for Simon, his family. His uncle Bob, who was actually the very reason Simon came to Australia, has died, and Simon's going to be taking the funeral. So just thinking of you guys, because life does go through all these ups and downs. I mean, even your mum, Jeff, their beloved horse had to be put down yesterday.
It was very, very sad.
It is. Yep. It is sad. And like with Glenda and the saga with her cat, like we all get affected. We do. I'm not laughing at you about your cat. No,
it's not funny. Sorry,
it isn't. But it's the ups and downs of life. And like even today, it's Pete and Colleen Major's 23rd wedding anniversary, and
Stephen Carey's as well.
Do you know what? They all got married on the same day, 23 years ago. So quite remarkable.
Lovely.
So congratulations to you guys.
Awesome. Did you have anything else to chat about before we go to Redgum Kids?
Yeah, I just actually wanted to mention how with the fire recovery, with our team that's working there, Redgum is active every single week in the fire area, and there's still cleaning up going on. And even this week, I got contacted by somebody whose dad had received the Father's Day cake and the chocolates, and how impacted he was by that. And I just talking to Coral and saying how amazing it was that what we're doing. So that's really great to hear as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And one thing we do have coming up in about 3 weeks' time, we are going to run a Redgum Trivia Night. So this is going to be a little bit of fun. There'll be more information coming out. But if you want to pencil in your diary, Saturday, 24th of October, it's going to be over Zoom and using an app called Kahoot. It's going to be lots of fun. So pencil that in, and it'll be open to anybody. It's going to be $5 entry, and we're going to pull the money together and get some awesome prizes. So we haven't decided whether it's going to be...
I'm going to become rich in one night.
Pardon?
I'll become rich in one night.
Yeah, so Lex he's getting quite competitive.
It is. It's happening, yes.
Lovely. Okay, so stick around for Redgum Kids.
Good morning, Redgum Kids. Good morning. Good to see you. We're reading the story today from Genesis 6 about Noah who built the ark. You've probably heard about this, saying how many years passed and soon there were lots of people in the world. They were becoming more and more wicked, and this made God very sad. He made up his mind to send a terrible flood to destroy everything that he had created. But there was one good man on earth who loved and obeyed God. His name was Noah, and he had 3 sons. God told Noah to build an enormous boat, an ark, so that he and his family might be saved, along with 2 of every living creature on the whole earth. People laughed at Noah for building a boat in the middle of the land, but he ignored them, for he trusted God. And when they got into the ark, and the ark was finished, and they all went on board, Genesis 7 to 9 now, this is about the flood. Noah loaded it with food for his family and the animals, and then God sent the animals to the ark, 2 by 2, male and 1 female, 1 of every kind of animal, bird that lived on the earth and flew in the skies. When they were all safely in, it began to rain, and how it rained! Water poured down from the skies and covered all the land. Every living creature was drowned. All the towns, cities were washed away. But the ark and its precious cargo floated free on a world of water. Wow! For 40 days and 40 nights it rained. Then at last it stopped. After a while the flood waters began to go down. Noah sent out a dove, and when it returned with an olive leaf in its beak, Noah knew that the flood was over, for the trees were beginning to grow again. Then it was time for Noah and the animals to leave the ark. Noah was filled with gratitude, and God promised him that he would never again send such a dreadful flood. He put a beautiful rainbow in the sky and to remind him of his promise. And we just say thank you to God every time we see a rainbow. Thanks, children. Good to see you all, Redgum kids. Have a good week. Bless you. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. We are continuing our series today on heaven and hell. This is week 4. So we know this can be a bit of a controversial, maybe a confusing topic for some people. So if you have questions, we really encourage, or even comments, or if you disagree with Lex, he loves a bit of a disagreement. So you can always message to the Redgum messenger page, or you can email any questions in, and Lex would love to address them next week or the following week. Okay. We're going to sing a song called How Great Is Your Faithfulness. This is just a song about how God never changes and how he always remains the same no matter what's going on in our lives. My heart belongs to you, God. How I love to sing your praise. Your love surpasses in the skies, and the heavens cannot contain. Sing my heart. My heart belongs to you, God. How I love to sing your praise. Your love surpasses in the skies, and the heavens cannot contain. You do not change from day to day, and seasons will pass, and still you remain. How great is your and faithfulness, oh Lord, how great and is your faithfulness. How great is your and faithfulness, oh Lord, how great and is your faithfulness. belong. Your grace covers me again, and so forever I'll sing a new song. You do not change from day to day, and seasons will pass, and still you remain. How great is your faithfulness, O Lord? How great and is your faithfulness? And how great is your faithfulness, O Lord? How great and is your faithfulness? You do not change from day to day. Seasons will pass, and still you remain. You do not change from day to day. Seasons will pass, and still you remain. And how great is your and faithfulness, O Lord? How great is your faithfulness? And how great is your and faithfulness, O Lord? How great and is your faithfulness? You give life. And you give life. You are love. And you bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore. And every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. And it's your breath in our lungs, and so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, and so we pour out our praise to you only. Sing, you give life. And you give life. You are love, and you bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore in every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. And it's your breath in our lungs, and so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, and so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, and so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, and so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise, our hearts will cry, these bones will sing, and great and are you, Lord, and all the earth will shout your praise, hearts will cry, these bones will sing, and great are you, Lord. It's your breath, and it's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. And so we pour out our praise to you only. And it's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. God, we just thank you that there's no greater name than you, Jesus, and we just worship you wherever we are. We just say thank you, God. Thank you for who you are, and thank you that you are with us right now. Amen.
Thanks, Rachel. I love the fact that we have this little bit of time of what we call worship, which is, music and a way of responding to God, but it's also a way of just pausing in the business of life and taking the focus off ourselves and onto God, and that actually can change us. So thank you, because I can't do what you do.
No worries.
So it's great. Last week, I spoke about how God doesn't use punishment or the fear of punishment to use as a tool to control our behaviour. That hell isn't a punishment for the wrong stuff we do any more than heaven is a reward for being good. And I know that left some of you feeling a little bit uneasy, because all you've ever known, all you've ever been taught is that God punishes sin, that God punishes wrong behaviour. And there's a book that I've been reading, and I've been really encouraged by this book, and it's written by a guy called Danny Silk. He's from Bethel Church in America, and it's actually entitled Unpunishable, Ending Our Love Affair with Punishment. And it goes into great depth on the subject, and I think it's really, really helpful. And it's a book that I'd recommend. I've recommended it to people in Redgum who have started reading it, and already it's been very helpful to them. So I've never promoted a book before, so Danny, I'm not getting royalties, but I wish I was. And so I just would really encourage that book to you if you want to really go into more detail and get a bigger understanding of this concept. Because our Aussie way of life is actually a way of punishment. We were founded as a nation, as a penal colony, which means they punished people by sending them here. This wasn't a holiday destination back in those days. It was where you separated people from everything that was precious to them. And we were formed as a society built around punishment. And what happens to us gets into us. It affects us, and it comes back out again. And so it is very human to punish, but our Australian way of life is really steeped in it. And if someone hurts us, we hurt them back. If someone offends us, does the wrong thing by us, we punish them in some way. We tell other people about them so that they will punish them, that they won't go to their shop and buy things, or they won't treat them well. We use punishment as a weapon, and it's used upon us. And it's easy to assume that, well, God would be the same. And even when you read some of the Old Testament stories, you could come up with that conclusion. But the Bible is this progressive revelation of who God is. And if you look through a lens of punishment, you may miss what God's actually doing in those early formative stages of humanity and his workings and his relationship with them. Now, I don't know if you can remember back to 2008. Steve Sparris doesn't like trivia quizzes, and he doesn't remember anything that's happened in the past unless it's important to him. But there was something that happened that was important to the Christian community in Australia back in 2008. And there was a young, very gifted youth communicator, Christian youth communicator, songwriter called Mike Guglielmucci. And Mike had a very high profile in Australia, and then he also had a high profile about a disease, a cancer that was affecting his life, and a whole lot of other complications as well. And then after about 2 years through this journey, he came out and admitted that it was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. And when he confessed that, it destroyed, it caused havoc with Christians because they'd believed him. They had trusted what he was saying. And it wasn't just a little lie, it was massive. And he did it in his confession to cover up this life-controlling problem, this addiction to pornography. And during this time in his life, he himself was confused between what was true and what wasn't true. He was feeling symptoms of pain. He was going through all this stuff in this make-believe world that he created. And during this time, he wrote this amazing song called Healer. And when it debuted, it went to number 2 on the ARIA charts. And churches all around our nation were singing this song. A great song. But when this all came out into the open, every TV news, the current affairs, covered the story, reran the story. They milked it for all they could. And at the time, I was living in Sydney, in New South Wales, and I actually met Mike personally. I was involved in running a big youth night with Youth Alive, and Mike was a guest speaker. And I can remember I'm sitting in the front row, and Mike's just on the stage in front of us, and he's talking about the fact that he's had 33 broken bones in his body, that right now as he's preaching, he has 8 broken vertebrae. If he sneezed, he could die from broken bones. And then he did this thing. He said the power of God had come upon him, and he jumped off the stage and onto the floor. He said that would kill him, except power was in him. And I saw all this unfolding. And then when I found out that it was a lie, the whole thing was a lie, it was so devastating. And how does someone do that? How does someone act like that and live it out and use it to manipulate people? It was massive, the fallout from this lie, this fabrication that he created. I know people were praying for him, had compassion on his family for the terminal cancer that he's going through, this cancer that only affected old people, that affected his bones the way he told us it did, but it wasn't true. And Brian Houston came out at the Hillsong Church and made a public statement about this just a few weeks later. And that statement was honest, it was transparent, it was balanced, and it was full of grace. And when Brian talked about what Mike Guglielmucci had done, he quoted a verse that we spoke about last week. And it's this verse in Galatians, and Paul's talking. It says, if someone is caught in sin, you who are spiritual, you who are mature Christians, should restore them gently. But do this in this humble way where you watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. At the time when all this was happening, my brother Jeff, his daughter Lisa, was in the process of shifting to Melbourne. And what really affected her, what really impacted her, wasn't just what Mike did, but how some Christians were reacting, how they were reacting out of a punishment mindset, how they were wanting to bring control and punishment over Mike, and say even the song Healer that he wrote, it suddenly was just taken off churches everywhere. People just didn't sing this song anymore. The song wasn't broken. The song was a great song. It was inspired. The lyrics are theologically correct. It's inspired by the Holy Spirit. It came from the gift within Mike. It wasn't the lie. It was a great song, but people just stopped singing it. But I think what really got to Lisa was this open criticism of Mike, even from church leaders, and it was open because it was a way of punishing Mike for what he had done. And as she got to Melbourne, Lisa had this desire to be part of a church where people would be healed and made whole, they'd be restored, that wounded Christians wouldn't be publicly criticised, but they would find healing and hope, and there wouldn't be punishment for our failures. And eventually that led her to a church in Melbourne called Edge Church. And when she got to Edge Church, she found that one of the members of the leadership team at Edge was Mike Guglielmucci. And as Lisa's journey with Edge has gone, for the last 18 months, she has been in charge of kids, young adults, youth for Edge globally, across campuses in Australia and around the world. And for the last 18 months, guess who her boss has been? Mike Guglielmucci. But not the same Mike back in 2008. This is a Mike that is now healed and restored and whole. A new creation is the way the New Testament describes someone who's had this real encounter with God. And in fact, just recently he's announced that he's going to be planting a new church in Port Adelaide with the support of the Edge leadership team, that they've been all prayed through it, they're all in agreement. It's like the full circle. It's like he's coming back to where he was, but this time not broken, not damaged like he was previously. And during this journey that Lisa went through, her dad, Jeff, he got to experience Edge Church at the same time that we were beginning Redgum. The preliminary conversations, the talking, and Jeff was really impacted by the way this church showed grace and restored failed people, including failed Christians. And it became part of the conversation with starting Redgum and the values that we were looking in. And this has been my life journey too, of getting to this place where we would start a church where we wouldn't use punishment as a tool, but we would restore people the way God restores people. And for Edge Church, they paid a price. See, when you try to restore a high-profile Christian like Michael Guglielmucci, some people will misunderstand you because they see through this punishment paradigm. And good people left their church over what Edge was doing in restoring Mike. Because the punishment lens, it will always tell us that, okay, if they've changed, how do we know they've changed? How do we know they're changed if they aren't punished? And how do we know that they won't go back to doing what they're doing? And see, the punishment lens, the question is, well, how much punishment is enough? How much time in the sin bin is enough time away from God's gifting upon someone's life? What happens is that God asks a different question. He asks, has there been true repentance, which means that you see things differently. You have a way that change happens on the inside because you understand differently, you see differently, your values change. And God asks as like reconciliation happened between him and us, and between us and each other, and restoration, healing. Because we don't just need forgiveness in life, we need healing. And if that's taking place, then God can position recycled failures into any area of his kingdom. Paul, who instructed us how to restore people, to do that gently, with humility, he also wrote something in Romans chapter 6, and these are his words. He says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life." He doesn't say the punishment of sin is death. He says the wages of sin. And 2 chapters earlier, Paul explains what the wages are. He said wages aren't a gift, they're an obligation. It would be wrong, it would actually be unjust to withhold wages. And God is a God of justice and a God of mercy all at the same time. Only God can simultaneously do both and get it perfectly right. In fact, when Paul uses the word death, when he said the wages of sin is death, he's talking about separation from God. He's not meaning sort of like non-existence. It's still a conscious state, but it's separated from the kindness of God. And it begins in this life and transfers into eternity. But the big difference is that in this world, God's presence is everywhere. You can't get away from God's presence. Hell, God has withdrawn his presence. There is no hope because his presence is gone. And it doesn't matter if you've ever had a sense of overwhelming depression and hopelessness, in nothing compared to hell, because in this life, God's presence is still here. And hell, the torment is that God no longer is present. That's the torment. And we're left to our own identity because, see, sin is really building an identity upon anything other than being an adopted son or daughter of a living God. And when Mike Guglielmucci was going through this really difficult time leading up to 2008, he described it as like the cross was up here, that Jesus was up here on a mountain, and he was pushing and crawling and striving to get up to Jesus, to get to him. But what was pulling him down was the shame. It was a guilt. It was a self-punishment. It was the expectations of others, the pressures of others, the expectation to perform. And he's doing it without relationship. He's trying to do it in his own strength, and it fails. And the punishment and the fear of punishment will never change our identity. And it didn't help that secret identity that he had of a different life that everyone didn't know. And it just pulled him down. But now he says that he's now standing next to Jesus at the cross. There isn't the striving, there isn't the pushing anymore, because he's experienced not just forgiveness and not just love, but a church, a people that were unpunishable in the way they approached the restoration of him. Because only extravagant, over the top, radical love can do that. And that's what God offers. Now, Paul makes a really black and white statement about all this in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And in the New Living Translation, he says this: "The old written covenant ends in death, ends in separation from God. This punishment paradigm, this punishment lens, this punishment way of life, it ends in separation. It does not work. And if it doesn't work, God doesn't use it. It's not part of what he does." Paul says this is what God does. It's under this new covenant that Jesus established, where the Spirit, where grace brings life. Jesus told a parable, a story of a king. And this king decided that those he had loaned money to needed to pay him back. And he called this one man in and he says, I have loaned you over a couple of $1 million, over $2 million. It's time you paid it back. And the guy goes into meltdown. And he's crying and he's pleading and he's sobbing. He says, but I can't. I can't. I don't have it. But if you give me enough time, I'll pay it back. Everything. I'll pay it back if you just give me enough time. Because the king had threatened to sell him and his wife and his kids into slavery to pay for the debt. And the king, out of compassion and pity for this man, not only says to him, okay, I forgive you for not paying it back. He says, I cancel the debt. You never have to pay this debt back. You are free. And this servant of the king walks out of the palace. And as he walks out, he just happens to bump into another one of the king's servants who owed him personally a couple of $1,000. And he grabs this guy by the throat and he throws him around and says, you haven't paid me. You've got to pay me. You've got to pay me now. And this other servant, he does the same story that this guy had done. He says, but if you give me time, I'll pay it back. But I can't now. I don't have it. So the first servant gets the second servant arrested and thrown into jail as a punishment for not paying him back. When the other servants heard about this, they were upset, like Lisa. Like Lisa was upset when she heard other Christians punishing Michael Glamucci with their words, with the conversations, with the criticisms. And yet they, every one of them, had experienced the forgiveness of a king who had wiped out a debt that none of us can pay. And in the story Jesus told, he brought this first servant before him. And he says, you have acted evilly. What you've done is evil. I'd shown you goodness. I'd shown you kindness and mercy. I'd given you mercy, but you have just brought punishment on someone else. And because of that identity that you've hung on to, you're now going to experience separation. You're going to go into the prison yourself. And Jesus ended up telling the story about this is the way that the kingdom, the culture of heaven works. We are able to receive mercy and forgiveness, and it's just and right to pass it on. It's not right to punish. There's a story that happened just before I was born in 1956, and it was a very high-profile story around the world where 5 American missionaries, young blokes in their 20s, were speared to death in the Amazon jungle in Ecuador by the Auca Indians. They were a warring tribe of Indians that were very hostile to any outside influence. And these 5 missionaries had tried over a period of time. They'd learnt some of the language. They'd tried to contact them. They'd landed their little plane on this stretch of sandbank. And in early January 1956, these 5 missionaries were speared to death. But the power of the story is actually in what happened afterwards. And one of the missionaries, Jim Elliot, he wrote in a little journal before he ever went to Ecuador, he wrote these words. He says, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." And his wife, with their 3-year-old daughter, 2 years later, went into that village and lived with that village and shared Jesus with that village, as did the sister of Nate Saint. His sister Rachel went in and lived with that village and lived in that village till the day she died. I don't know what price those women paid to go back into that village where the husband, the brother, had been murdered. But I know this. They gave up. When Jim Elliot said, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose," they gave up the right to punish. So you can forgive someone and they still pay the consequences. But the wives, the sister, the families behind these murdered people, They paid a price of not forgiving, but not punishing. And in the years that have come out of that, this warring tribe, this violent tribe that had only ever known retaliation against themselves, they lived in fear of each other, because when someone did something wrong, they punished them. They speared them to death. They found a different way of life in Jesus. They found an unpunishable God who doesn't do things by punishment. And Nate Saint, who was speared to death in that river in early January 1956, when his own son, Steve, was 9 years old, he went and lived in that village. And when he was a teenager, one of those Auca Indians, whose name was Min Kay, who had become one of the first Christians in that village, baptized him in the water where that same man had speared Steve's dad. And later, as an adult, Steve went back to live in that village with his family, and his own children called the man who had speared his dad grandfather. And he toured parts of the world with this Indian Auca warrior who had speared to death his own father, and now there's love and healing and restoration. See, that is the culture of heaven. It's an unpunishable culture. It's a culture of forgiveness. It's a culture of restoration. It's choosing not to punishment. It's the culture of heaven. It's how God works. And it sets people free. Forgiveness is one of the greatest, most beautiful things you can give another human person. And next week I want to speak into the power of forgiveness, and you might find it's a little bit different than you expect. It might be a little bit different to how you've seen how forgiveness is meant to work. So that's coming next week. But I encourage you, if all you've known as a way of life is punishment, God has a better way. And it begins in relationship with Him. Thanks, Rachel.
In the darkness we were waiting, without hope and without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes, to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory, to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, till the storms move for good. For the Lamb conquered death, and the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe. For the souls of all had come to the Father are restored, and the Church of Christ was born, and then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of all shall not kneel, shall not faint. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. And praise the Father, praise the Son, and praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
And thanks for joining us this morning. We really value you. We don't take it for granted that you're part of where we're going with Redgum Church, and like I would really personally love to hear from you. Ring me, email me, send something to our website, text, whatever. But if you've got questions about the concepts of heaven and hell, I'd love to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and just any time, honestly, we're available. We want to be available. We want to be in your world. And I know some of you are in South Australia, and some of you are in Lakes Entrance and around Sarsfield, and wherever you are, we want to connect with you. We want to hear from you, and we see you, we notice you, we love you. We really do. And so we'll see you next week.
See you later, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.